Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling, and if I had to put down on paper the three most improbable rises to greatness, I would start with Lee Kemp starting out in ninth grade, first time he ever wrestled in ninth grade. 5 years later, he's in the NCAA championship finals for Wisconsin. I'd put John Peterson in there. He places fifth at the NAIA championships in 1971, makes a world team later that year. Then the next year wins an Olympic silver medal. And then the third one I'd put in that category is our guest today. Mike Houck is the very first Greco-Roman World champion from the United States. He won a world title in 1985, very first to do that. There were 3 world champions in the weight bracket. And I don't even know really where you started from, to be honest with you. Like, how did this journey transpire? Where did you start? I know you won 2 Christian college titles at heavyweight, but beyond that, where did your journey start? How did you get started in the sport? And let's go through your rise to the top, Mike.
Yeah, so we moved to a wrestling community when I was in 5th grade, and I got recruited right away that fall, and I joined the kid wrestling program in Robbinsdale, Minnesota. And people that know Minnesota wrestling know that Robbinsdale, prior to Apple Valley, about a decade and a half ago, had the most state champions of any school in the state of Minnesota. And they actually closed the high school in '83. So it was a great wrestling community. I kind of landed in the right place, kind of a hotbed of wrestling, and just got brought into that right away. Wrestled, through junior high and then in high school. Kind of just took to the sport. I love wrestling. I love to work hard. I love to push myself. Very inspiring coach in high school, who was also the coach that recruited me as a kid. Randy Hansen is his name. Just very inspiring, and just got us all thinking like we could be state champions, And so for me, I wanted to be a state champion. I also played football. I just love sport, but had my heart set on it, worked hard, paid the price. And I qualified for state 3 times, twice as an individual, once my junior year, senior year. And then we ended up second in the state as in the team tournament my junior year. So I was an entrant there too. And I'll say this, Kyle, that I was a failed high school wrestler. At our senior banquet, I got an award. They called it Lucky 7, and it had the numbers 0 and 7 on it, and it represented my 3 times to state in my 7 matches, and I didn't win a match, and it was so disappointing for me. And I just. And I had some setbacks. I cut a lot of weight my junior year, way too much weight my junior year. I thought if I could get to this weight class that was, and I worked harder doing that than I did anything else, and I was just worthless. And my senior year, I had a little bit of an injury. I kind of came back from it, but still, I just so underperformed. And so, I just that's where I started. But at the same time, Minnesota was a place for Greco-Roman wrestling. And Jack Gauze, Dan Chandler, the Minnesota Wrestling Club. So I had an opportunity in junior high to be exposed to the sport of Greco-Roman wrestling. I think it was like 1973 or 1974. The Minnesota Wrestling Club, Alan Rice brought the Polish national team over at that time. And they did a series of dual meets around the Twin Cities with the Minnesota Wrestling Club. And the Poles at that time were like number 2 in the world behind the Soviets. And they had this lineup of world and Olympic champions up and down their lineup. And I remember going there and watching those guys and just absolutely falling in love with the sport of Greco-Roman wrestling. And as I got to do that in the summer times and postseason, I always had much more success in that than I did at folk style wrestling. So part of, I think, my failure in high school was that I wasn't really a great leg wrestler. And I've just always been more prone to wrestling Greco-Roman wrestling. But so that was my high school start, right? I don't know. Where do I go from here?
Well, I'd like to know, like, what happened. So you get out of high school, you don't win a match at the state wrestling championships. How do you even have a vision that you might be able to carry this forward, whether it's going to Maranatha Bible school or Bible college, or how do you make the transition and decide that wrestling is actually a viable option for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Man, oh man, I keep asking myself the question, how in the world did I do it? And I'll tell you, there were paradigm shifts in my life. And I think the very first one was, I kind of had a crisis at the end of my senior year. I really, really struggled. Everything I'd planned for, Division I football player, and then it was, being a D1 wrestler and maybe an Olympic champion. Everything came to a halt at the end of, the wrestling season that year, because nothing that I'd prepared for or hoped for or thought was going to happen happened. And part of it, there was kind of a crisis going on in my life, in that, whatever I was doing just seemed like empty, right? I didn't, I think about motivation and passion and what drives us and what, and there was a dichotomy, or there was like this disconnect between how people saw me, because I was an incredibly hard trainer. I was voted best athlete, the end of my senior year. And it was like, because I'd earned this reputation, but when it came right down to it, I kind of got to the place where it was like, so what if I won a world title? How's that, or a state title? How's that going to change me? How am I going to be different? Or it just didn't mean, it seemed empty to me. And there was something just really, really missing. And I made some bad choices, and I don't like to talk about it a lot, but those choices led to me coming to faith in Christ. And I found, I say it's a paradigm shift, but I would say that I found my why and my purpose in life. That life was more than just about, are you the toughest, hardest working guy? Are you winning titles? Are you doing whatever? Life is way, way, way more than that. And when I found a reason and a purpose to live, basically, I started to think about, what am I going to do with my life now? And at this point in time, and this would have been probably the fall after I graduated from high school. And I was getting my life on track, and I was thinking about what I was going to do with my life. Sports were off the table for me. And I can remember I was praying, I was asking God, what do you want me to do? That was kind of my heart's prayer. And I just had like an epiphany, I'm like, in this overwhelming sense of, well, why not wrestle Greco-Roman wrestling? And why not make a run at being an Olympic champion? And my high school wrestling coach contacted me within about a week, or I contacted him. He had connections to the Minnesota Wrestling Club, and he made the introductions. He brought me down there. So it would have been, so I graduated in 77. And so it would have been like late winter of 77 that I stepped into the wrestling room with the Minnesota Wrestling Club. And Dan Chandler, Brad Ryans, there were 6 of the 10 Olympians from the 1976 Montreal Games in that room. And I stepped in, and they just welcomed me. And it was like, when things fit and they feel right, they just feel right. It's like, I just landed in this realm. They beat me up. I was terrible, but I kept coming back, and they beat me up, and they take time after practice, and they do some hands-on, and they'd work with me, and they'd kind of pass on their knowledge. I just started to take off from that point. I'm not a flash in the pan kind of person. I'm definitely, I'm a turtle in the race of life, slow and steady. And I think about what were the things that made the difference. I think number one was the purpose and the passion that drove me, and why I was wrestling. And that grew over the years as well. But I think the reasons that I ended up becoming successful, because Kyle, I don't know how in the world it was me, how did I do it, right? And I break it down, and nothing was flashy, but I think the paradigm shift, the learning part of it, I think I became a really good learner, trial and error. And I just started to pick things up little by little, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I got pounded on a lot, but I was on that great learning trajectory. So it would have been, I think I made the junior world team in 79, and that was my first, and I won the nationals that year. I wrestled Ed Bannock. He entered the, what was it? He entered the national Greco 19 and 20-year-old Espoir, whatever they called it back then. And I wrestled him in a match, and he was ahead of me, but we had this flurry, and I threw him going off the mat, and Reingens was in my corner, and I stand up, and Brad goes, I think I was down on the mat. He goes, Houck, are you okay? I go, yeah. I go, you know what? I can throw him. And it was one of those moments, because Ed had already won a national championship, right? And I came back, I ended up beating him in the match, and it was a barn burner of a match. And it was a real turning point for me. And that was the year, so that I won the junior nationals, made the junior world team that year. Then in 1980, I won an AAU national senior title. And then I ended up third on the Olympic team in the trials that year. And so, and then in 81, I made my first senior world team. 82 was a bit of a setback. Frazier beat me, had a little bit of a tougher year. And then 1983 made the world team again. I was 0-2, by the way, in 81. And then in 83, then I ended up winning a match. And that was a huge turning point for me. I beat a Pole who was ranked 6th in the world, and just a barn burner of a match. I drew the Hungarian first round that year, who was Olympic champion from 1980, and scored 3 or 4 points on him, and really felt like he was kind of, so 83 was the year that I feel like I really started to turn the corner. And then going into 84 for the Olympics, I'd been undefeated in the U.S. for about a year and a half. And I think I beat Steve probably 5 times in a row, so I beat him at nationals in 83. I beat him at the world team wrestle-off trials in 83. And then in 84, I won nationals. I won the Olympic trial tournament. And so we get down to the final 2 out of 3 in the final wrestle-off, and he headlocks me in the first match. And I spend a minute and 45 seconds on my back. And that's how we started out. He ended up winning the first match like 3-2, and then I won the second one 2-0. And I was beating him 3-0 in the final wrestle-off to make the team, and he scored a 3-point move, just a great slick move. And the match ended 3-3. He won on a criteria tiebreaker, and he ended up becoming our first ever Olympic gold medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling. And so that's kind of my journey to that point. And it was, I say it was slow and steady, and nothing was ever a sure thing, and everything seemed like a struggle and a battle. It was a great thing for me. I thought when I had my epiphany that God was going to give me an Olympic gold medal, right? It was like, I couldn't believe when I got beat that it actually had happened. And it wasn't, I wrestled incredibly well. I did everything right. I didn't make mistakes. Steve out wrestled me. And I really had to examine, deeper, faith and what is faith about? What's my faith about? What does this mean? Right. And I came to the conclusion, God never promised me I was going to be an Olympic champion. He set me on a path for my life. And I realized out of that, and kind of refocused again, that regardless of what the outcome is, my job is really to do the very best I can, and to pour my heart in to everything I do, and to do it for the right reasons, to honor God and to honor my family, and to honor my country, and to honor, whatever it is, that's a greater purpose beyond whatever it is that I do. And it took me a little bit to get my head around that. And so, I met Ben Peterson back in 1978, and I spent a year at Maranatha. I'll go back to that part of your question. I feel like I'm bouncing all over here. But, I spent a year there in 78, 79, and then I returned home to Minnesota. So after the 84 Olympics, I ended up going back to college with the idea I was going to finish. And so spent a lot of time talking to Ben about the experience and processing kind of my journey to that point. And in an almost like do I keep doing this or am I done? And Ben really encouraged me to keep going. And so I did. And Ben was my training partner that year. He's a former freestyler, but he worked with me. I trained a little bit at Madison. I did the winter tours and things like that. And then, I just had a magical 1985. It was incredible. And I think the difference was, and not that I was totally off track in 84, but the why I did what I did, the passion and the desire, the I don't know, just the whatever it took to get me over the top to win that title, it was just an incredible experience. So
let's talk about 1984, because I can remember you talking about this, and I'd like you to elaborate on it, where I think several years, either you watched Steve Frazier win the gold medal or you watched your match, but you were in your classroom and you watched it and you had this mix of emotions of, I'm so glad Steve won, but then you're like, it should have been me, and just what it feels like to kind of maybe close yourself off to wrestling for a while and then be reopened by watching a video that maybe you haven't seen for a while, and what that felt like to know that you probably, like Steve Frazier, missed out on the chance, but to know that it could have been your spot.
Yeah. So, all right. So I'll try to, so after the 84 trials, it's a bitter pill to swallow when you think you're supposed to be number one, when you were number one, that you're going to be the person that's going to do this, to then be that person that does all the work to get another guy ready to get the glory. Right. But I made the choice. I was never not going to go, just because I just wasn't wired that way. I knew that was my responsibility, and I still did need to be ready, but I owed it to the program, and I have the utmost respect for Steve, and Steve earned it, and he deserved everything he got. Right. So I went, and I was his training partner. And the moment that you described, Kyle, was, they took the alternates. We actually got to go watch the Olympics, which is rare, right? But because it was in LA and we trained out in Big Bear, outside of LA. And so I got to go watch, and I got to watch Steve, and I sat there in that gold medal match in the stands. And it was like, as the match progressed and as it got to the end, I'm thinking, he's going to do it. He's going to do it. And the emotion in my heart when he actually won the match, the crowd erupted, but my insides just went, he did it. And it was like, God, it should have been me, and it was like my heart was literally ripped in two, and it was the weirdest emotion I've ever felt. Well, fast forward to, years later, I'm a school teacher, and I've been away from wrestling a long time. And I was teaching computer classes, and it was like more in the earlier years of the internet and YouTube, and a bunch of my kids were sitting around their computer, and they were just like laughing and having the greatest time. I'm thinking, oh, they got to be up to something. So I walk over there and I look. They go, Mr. Houck, we're watching you wrestle. I go, what? It was the 1984 Olympic trials, and it was the match where Steve put me on my back, and it's like, Mr. Houck, which one's you? I'm like, well, let me tell you the story. And but I'd never seen the match until that point. And this was probably, I don't know, 15 years ago now. And to kind of reprocess that, it's funny because it was very, very painful. You open the wound in a sense, but Kyle, I've never been bitter. I've never felt bad. I've never let wrestling define me as a person. It's something I got to do. I love it. But there's just so much more, but you pour your heart into something and you miss it. But again, my story too, for me to turn around in 1985 and to win the world championships, coming off of that, it's storybook in my mind. I wouldn't change any of it, because I grew and I learned so much from 1984 in terms of really what is life about and what's really the most important and what is my job in life. Outcomes, we can control an outcome to an extent, right, in terms of effort and that, but so many of the outcomes in life we just don't control. And, our job is to do the very best we can.
Well, let's take 1984. So was it automatic that you were going to continue training for 85, or was there a lull where you said, I don't know if I can keep doing this?
No, I took a deep breath. I took a deep breath because I'd put off college. You know, like I said, I went in 78, 79, and I knew I wanted to get a college education. Um, so it wasn't for sure, you know. Um, and but at the same time, I didn't get away from it. There was something gnawing at me still. Like there's something undone yet for me, right? But I had to work through it, and Ben helped me work through it. Ben's an incredible coach. He's an incredible mentor, counselor. And if it, you know, and I think had I not gone to Maranatha that year, I don't know that I would have been at the same place. You know, for me to win the world championships, you know, I was at such a peak mental, emotional, spiritual place in my life that I don't know. And all of that stuff was, you know, made a difference for me, you know. So
When you went into 85, did you think you could win it?
I've never thought, I mean, I've always hoped and I've always done my very best. I mean, that's an interesting question, you know, like I've heard people say, I knew I was going to win and I'm going to win this thing. And I'm like, no. What I did know, Kyle, was that I was ready. I knew that I had the tools that I needed. You know, I told you like 1983, another huge turning point for me. Pavel Katzen became our national coach in 1983, right? Former Soviet. And he was incredible. He brought in a strategy that, so here's how I put it, right? So if I started my journey with an epiphany, right? As an 18-year-old kid who had no reason to think or believe he could ever become a world or Olympic champion in Greco-Roman wrestling, right? I started that with an epiphany. It was a journey of faith, right? And I took it a step at a time. My first step was in the room with the Minnesota Wrestling Club, and they beat the crap out of me, right? But step. Little increments, you know, making the junior world team, making my first senior world team, winning my first national championship, winning my first match in 1983. But when Pavel came on board, he brought a strategy that so I went from pure faith to 1983 when Pavel started working with us. It's like I could see the path at that point in time. So I always liken it to like I did a lot of climbing in Colorado, you know, a lot of climbing mountains. And you start out, and when you're in the forest part of the pass, and you don't really know, right? You just take it a step at a time. You get to tree line, and you can then see your path to the peak, right? And I feel like Pavel showed me the way, and I think he showed the rest of us the way. You know, he called it stick and move, and he basically redefined the sport. He understood the Soviet school perfectly. He understood the heart of Americans, and it was all about heart with him. You know, we weren't going to out-slick them. You know, it had to be about heart. It had to be about movement. It had to be about keeping them out of their positions and just breaking them. And that's how we trained. And so for me, my aggressive style, I was a great pummeler. I was a great off balancer. I had great, you know, I had some really nice combinations. And I had a gas tank that I developed that just motor. And I gained the skills that I needed. So the question, did I know I was going to do it? You know, I didn't, but I knew I had the skills to do it. As, you know, I beat the Bulgarian early on in the second round, and then I wrestled Frank, and I just kept pouring my heart in, working the plan, working the strategy. When I beat Frank, I ended up then had a bye. Then I lost a match, and then I was in the finals. And it's like, but I knew after I beat Frank, you know, the Bulgarian, Kamchev, and Frank Anderson were the two, you know, the two best guys at the weight by far. You know, I thought the Bulgarian who ended up winning the Olympics in '88 was the best guy at the weight. But Kniegan was solid. And I just, even going into the finals, I had doubts. I really, you know, but I just kept work the plan. I knew how I needed to beat him, and I had the skills. I just had to execute.
I've seen the video of that gold medal win, and it's pretty euphoric. They throw you up and down, and it's an incredible moment. So I'd recommend anyone going and finding that video, because that's one of those that'll make your eyes well up and tear up. But did you understand the monumental accomplishment you had? Just even to put it in perspective again, like the United States started competing in the World Championships in earnest in 1961. Greco-Roman was not our style. You had finally broke the code, and we've only had 4 others in the United States win a Greco-Roman World title, and the last one was in 2006 with Joe Warren. Did you understand the magnitude?
You asked me that question about a year and a half ago, I think, and I think it's the best question. And I think my initial response was, I kind of did, and but I didn't. I mean, I've thought about this so much over the years, Kyle, especially in recent years, and I've done some research. And the Soviets entered the scene in 1952, and from 1952 up through 1983, they won a total of 105 world gold medals and 30 Olympic gold medals. From 52 to 83, Americans had 0, right? The Soviets had a grand total of 235 medals, unprecedented, right? America had 7 total Greco-Roman medals. And so when I look at it from that standpoint, and I look at me, a failed high school wrestler, and I look at, I didn't get the magnitude, So the Soviet Union, they're done in 91, right? That's when they're done. The unified team in 92 competed. You could arguably, throw that stuff in there. But we didn't win our second world championship till 95, till after the Soviet Union, dispersed. So to me, it's just, no, I think, when I look at it now and I put it in a medal count perspective, yeah, it's fairy tale stuff. That whole era of Greco-Roman wrestling, though, wasn't just me. My gosh, there were, I think about like Dennis Kozlowski and Jim Martinez, and I think about, Blatnick and Gibson and man, I don't know. We broke the barriers in a time when we shouldn't have. We had no business winning. But I credit Pavel with a lot of that, putting us over the edge. But also, for me, I landed in the right place at the right time in Minnesota. And I had the best of the best. And Dan Chandler was just incredible. He was competing, but he was always the coach. He was the player coach. He was always learning new things, bringing people over, making connections. And, those guys poured into me in a very short period of time, what it took them a lifetime to learn. And so I feel like I got a jump start. I was like this link in the chain at the right time. And then Pavel comes on board and gives us an understanding and a connection. And, it was really, truly a peak and a highlight. And things changed after that. When the Soviet Union disbanded, and then all of a sudden, now we go to a little bit more professional system with paying athletes and a paid full-time national coach. Things changed, and the landscape of wrestling as a whole has changed too. And I don't think it's hard to compare eras and times, right? I just know that in my era as an athlete, it was storybook, and I was a part of something, and I felt that, and it was, when you talk about the euphoria of that end of that match, if people watch that match, it's boring. It's a brawl. It scores 1-1, but the end is just, it really, to me, it captured the grand finale of the journey. And yeah.
Well, going forward to 1988, you tried another time for the Olympics.
I did.
And you got second to Michael Foy. So was that different the next time around?
Was it different? It was, it was a little different. The first time, I just didn't believe it. I couldn't believe it, right? The second time, I'd felt the sting before, so, and I didn't have that, God's going to give me an Olympic medal and Olympic, but I really did think I was going to make the Olympic team. Again, I had an incredible year when I came back, and I beat Michael Foy at the Olympic trial tournament. And in Michael Foy, I didn't think he was going to be the guy. I thought it was going to be Couture or maybe Brad Johnson, but more than likely I thought it was going to be Couture, but Michael just, God, I never wrestled anybody like him before. He was so unorthodox. He was so tall and so powerful and explosive. And he wrestled out of his brain when he wrestled me. And it was knockdown, drag out, and high scoring matches. And it was, I look at it in both cases, Kyle, 84 and 88 for me. I didn't make mistakes. I wrestled incredibly well. I was on my game. I was mentally and emotionally there. And I just got beat. So I don't know. It was tough, and I guess I go back to, I can only do my best, and be fortunate for the success I had.
Are you glad that you had an opportunity past that to be the national Greco coach?
Yes. Yeah. That was a great, for that time, it was perfectly suited for me. I wish they would have kept Pavel around a little bit. Most people don't know much about him or that era, but I think Pavel had more to give to the program, and I think I could have transitioned after that. But I was young when I took the job. I learned quickly when I was there. I had 5 years of, I think, really good success and just high energy, and I just absolutely loved my time there. And probably left a little bit too early. I probably should have stuck around another 5 years. I probably should have stuck around for 2 Olympiads, but I was ready to do something else with my life. I really was. So I moved on.
If wrestling doesn't define who you are, would you define what wrestling means to you?
Man, yeah. Of everything I could have done in life, I'm just so glad that I was a wrestler. I'm so grateful for that. Wrestling to me is it's that perfect analogy of life, right? We wrestle with thoughts, we wrestle with ideas, we wrestle with, we use that term all the time. And to actually be a wrestler, and I think about a training ground for life. For me, it's like everything I've learned in wrestling, in terms of being resilient, in terms of becoming a learner, in terms of not letting defeat get you down, it all translates. You can make the connection to life, right? And so, and wrestling is so hard physically. The demand is just ridiculous. I mean, the old saying is, once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy, And I don't know if that goes for, some of the terrible emotional stuff we can go through and the loss and grief and such, but it sure does give you a pattern, healthy way to deal with all of life, right? And so wrestling it's shaped me, And I always tell people, when I think about wrestlers are the best people I know, just because of how they've learned to deal with things in a positive way. And it's not the winning and the high achieving success that to me is the most important thing about being a wrestler. It's the journey and the process and how I've learned to deal with all those other setbacks and hardships and the stuff that really is important, right? So I'm a wrestler through and through, right? But even if I never won a world championship or even made a world team and I got to compete at a high level, I would still be grateful that I was a wrestler. And I feel like I think about my peers that didn't have the success that I've had, and some of the guys that I just think the world of that haven't had the success that I would want them to have. I just think we're the same. We're the same. The only difference is I got a shiny object and you didn't, but in terms of who we are and what we're about, we're the same.
How do you stay involved in wrestling right now?
I've really phased out. Pat Smith has pulled me back in a number of years ago. I had neck surgery this year again. It's my third spinal surgery, so my body's really rough. So I've had to back off the mat. But Pat still calls me regularly. Yearly we meet and we talk about his training. We put together a periodization and strategies, and we talk about where he's at and what he needs to work on. And so I kind of function as a consultant, but I'm really not a part of that world heavily anymore. I haven't been. I'm a school teacher, and I love what I do. The passion I had for coaching and for wrestling, I have for teaching, and I'm on my 21st year of teaching, and it's what I love. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning now.
Does Pat Smith make you laugh as hard as he makes me laugh?
Pat Smith is a little bit afraid of me, so I don't know. Pat is very funny. When Pat talks to me, he's always very respectful, but then when I see videos of him doing different things, like we did that thing about Jay Robinson, about talking about your definition of work. Oh my gosh. When I see that, right. When I see things that he's posted, he does make me laugh. He's awesome. Well, I met Pat when he was like in fourth or fifth grade, and I coached him a little bit, and he was one of my students in middle school. So I had him in wood shop. And then, in high school, I was one of the high school coaches. So I've got a long history with Pat. I've watched him grow up, and I just think the world of him. He's amazing. He's a coach's dream. He really is.